Okay, what is up there YouTube? This is J-Man Time, and today I have a video on the ongoing Afghan war that has been raging since 2001, but is coming to a very intense climax as of the middle of 2021. And in this video, I'm going to go over 5 weapon systems, cheap weapon systems that are badly needed by the Afghan National Army. Now, the Afghan National Army was founded in 2001, the modern Afghan National Army, and it was made originally from the remnants of the Northern Alliance. And these were Afghan militias that were still somewhat loyal to the US and the Western world after the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 1996 during the Afghan Civil War. Now, since about 2008, the US and NATO forces have been modernizing the Afghan army, giving them new weapons and standard issued equipment like the American M16A2, the M4 carbine, and the M249 series of assault rifles and light machine guns. And they've also given them some new armored fighting vehicles like the American Humvee and the M1117 armored personnel carriers and MRAP type armored fighting vehicles to replace many of the old Soviet vehicles that were refurbished by the Afghan army during the early days of the early 2000s. But all of this isn't really enough, and the problem is that the Taliban and the other insurgent groups are actually modernizing in terms of their equipment. Afghan Taliban and other Islamist groups have been spotted on the battlefield using a number of more modern Western weapons, including modern rifles, machine guns, and have even captured some American armored fighting vehicles like the aforementioned Humvee and other armored fighting vehicles that were given to the Afghan forces but were later captured by the Taliban. And in some cases, these weapons and vehicles are smuggled in from the surrounding countries like Pakistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and maybe even Iran to an extent. As a result, the Afghan army, the modern Afghan army, has been pretty much overrun in many of the provinces in Afghanistan. The Afghan government only controls about 50 to 60% of Afghanistan's territory, and most of this includes provincial capitals like large cities and large towns and areas like rivers and dams. But there are huge chunks of Afghanistan, mostly the rural areas and the mountainous areas, that are under the control of the Taliban and other groups like the Islamic State, or ISIS for example, which also has territory in Afghanistan. So in this video, we're going to go over some cheap weapons that the Afghan army could use to at least increase their firepower when dealing with these insurgents and foreign jihadis in the case of ISIS. Now, the first weapon on the list is an automatic grenade launcher. And the first grenade launcher, the cheapest one I could find, that could be bought en masse is the Russian-made AGS-30, or the older version known as the AGS-17. And these are fully automatic grenade launchers that were developed in the 1990s in the case of the AGS-30, in 1967 in the case of the AGS-17. Now, these are both fully automatic grenade launchers. They are belt-fed, and they are chambered for the 30 by 29mm grenade cartridge, which is the standard Russian fully automatic grenade caliber. The weapons are pretty light. The AGS-30 only weighs just 16 kilograms or 35 pounds, about 20 pounds more than your standard issued rifle. And the weapon systems are fed by 29 round belts, and they have a rate of fire of 400 rounds per minute and a maximum range or targeting range of 2,100 meters or 6,889 feet. Now, the Afghan army does have standard issued grenade launchers like the American M203 underbarrel grenade launcher and some South African revolving grenade launchers, but those systems are simply not enough. And the main problem is the Afghan army is poorly funded. They only spend about $12 billion on their military as a whole. And as a result, they are mostly relying on cheap weapons. It includes cheap grenade launchers and other cheap imported weapons like RPG-7s that are imported from the neighboring countries or are purchased by the US and given to the Afghan army. Now, grenade launchers are very important in terms of modern warfare. Almost every army has a standard issued grenade launcher of various makes and models, usually a standard underbarrel grenade launcher like the M203, for example, the American M79 grenade launcher. Some of those are also used in Afghanistan. And then you have your infantry grenade launchers. These are the fully automatic machine gun-like grenade launchers. For example, the American Mark 19 grenade launcher, which is used by the Afghan army in some limited numbers. Now, the Afghan army doesn't have a lot of money to go around, so they're going to have to buy cheaper grenade launchers once the Americans begin to pull out towards the end of 2021. One of the main tactics that the Taliban and other insurgent groups use are ambush tactics. They normally surround a target and then try to storm it from multiple areas. Now, for the U.S. Armed Forces, this is pretty easy to deal with, as we have automatic grenade launchers like the Mark 19, and we also have a lot of air support, mostly from helicopters and gunships. But once the Americans pull out, the Afghans won't have this for the most part. They won't have as much air support as they do now. So they're going to have to beef up their infantry tactics to counter these insurgent attacks, especially these ambush and surrounding attacks. And an automatic grenade launcher would be much useful in these circumstances. They could easily repel enemy advances on their bases by simply pelting the areas around the base with grenade launchers, automatic grenade launchers. They already do this with RPGs and single action grenade launchers, but they need an automatic grenade launcher as standard issued. They do not have a standard issued automatic grenade launcher. Most of the Mark 19s that were given to the Afghan army are currently being taken back by the US, so when the Americans leave, they will not have those Mark 19s, and the Afghans will have to purchase their own automatic grenade launchers. Luckily, the AGS 30, the grenade launcher in this video, is very cheap. The average price of these grenade launchers is only $1,500 US. So the Afghan army could purchase 3,000 of these right now for just $4.5 million US. Now that sounds like a lot, but $4 million out of a budget of $12 billion, that's really nothing. And most of the budget of the Afghan army goes to the Air Force, buying aircraft and helicopters for the Afghan army and Afghan special forces. So $4 million for a standard issue grenade launcher, a very cheap one like the AGS-30 for the average Afghan army unit, is a good investment for the Afghan army. When it comes to open warfare, most of the Afghan army units are armed with technicals and light armored fighting vehicles. For example, the American Ford F-150 is a standard issued vehicle sent to the Afghan army, and the American Hummer, and these are unarmored and lightly armored vehicles, and they are usually armed with machine guns. And these are good for dealing with a few platoon worths of Taliban fighters, but what the Afghan army really needs is a vehicle that can deal with entire units. Now, the vehicle I would use in this case is the Soviet-made or Russian-made ZSU-23-4, also known as the Shildga. And the Shildga is a armored, self-propelled anti-aircraft gun from the 1960s, but it is sold by a variety of countries. Now, the reason I would use the Shildga is because it is basically a giant machine gun nest. If you're dealing with a large number of enemy forces, whether they be an organized guerrilla army like the Taliban, or just some random jihadis like ISIS, you want a weapon system that can take out multiple targets at once. Not just enemy soldiers, but enemy vehicles. The Taliban and ISIL both use light, unarmored, and armored personnel carriers and armored fighting vehicles. They use technicals, and captured Afghan army armored fighting vehicles. And the Shildga can deal with all of these, both the enemy infantry and the enemy light, unarmored, and armored fighting vehicles. The main armament of the Shildga is one 4-barreled 23mm Soviet-made AZP-23 Amur quad automatic anti-aircraft autocannon. Now, the Shildga was designed to shoot down enemy planes and missiles, but since the 1990s to now, it has been mostly used as an infantry support vehicle, and that's what the Afghan armies need. The Afghan army needs now a heavy armored support vehicle. The armor thickness is 9.2 millimeters or 9.2 to 15 millimeters, and the speed is 50 kilometers per hour or 31 miles per hour, and the Shildga has a crew of 4 to 6. Now, Afghanistan actually received 20 of these back in the 1980s when Afghanistan was a pro-Soviet country. But only 4 of these vehicles are still in service now in 2021, and they are mostly based in the city of Kabul. Now, the Afghan army needs a heavy armored vehicle like this to deal with large formations of Taliban guerrillas and insurgents who are using both light unarmored and armored vehicles. And this vehicle would be useful as a counterinsurgency vehicle when it comes to recapturing towns and villages. Remember, most of these Taliban militias, they are only armed with small arms, rifles and machine guns, and maybe a few rocket launchers like the RPG. But they don't have anything that can really destroy a tank, especially not a modern tank or a modernized tank. And there are modernized versions of the Shilka out there. So the Afghan army could use a vehicle like this on the modern battlefield. And luckily, the Shilka is pretty cheap nowadays. A single Shilka could be purchased for just $300,000, that's US. And the Afghan army could purchase about 200 to 300 of these Shilkas from either Russia, China, and a bunch of other countries for about 107 million US dollars, plus the ammunition, obviously. So the Shilka would be a good investment. If the Afghan army was to get at least 200 to 300 of these vehicles, they could use the Shilka as a counterinsurgency vehicle, just like what was done in both Iraq and Syria. Both the Iraqi and Syrian armed forces also used the Shilka to good effect against both ISIS and Al-Qaeda forces in Iraq and Syria during the Iraq Civil War and the Syrian Civil War. So the Shilka is a kind of heavy armored fighting vehicle that the Afghan army badly needs in 2021 if they want to reverse any of the gains made by the Taliban and other jihadi groups. And then there is my favorite vehicle on this list, the number 3 weapon system that the Afghan army could use to very good effect on the modern battlefield in 2021. And this is a very old vehicle, but a very cheap one at that in terms of its class. And that weapon system is the Russian-made ZSU-57-2, or the Object 500 as it was known in Russia. And this is a Russian heavy self-propelled anti-aircraft autocannon system that was developed in the 1950s. Now, in Afghanistan, the Afghan army lacks tanks. They have about 40 to 60 tanks overall, but these are mostly just old T-54-55s and T-60s, and they are very spread out. They are spread out to the various provinces throughout Afghanistan. So most of the Afghan army units don't actually have tanks or any kind of armored support vehicle or heavy armored support vehicle in their ranks. They're mostly using light vehicles like Technicals, Humvees, and maybe some medium vehicles like the aforementioned M1117 armored fighting vehicle. But what they really need is a heavily armored artillery support vehicle, and in this case the ZSU-57 would be useful as both an infantry support vehicle and as a counterinsurgency vehicle, especially in the open terrain, mountainous terrain of Afghanistan. And this vehicle here is very cheap. The main armament is 2 57mm Russian-made S-60 anti-aircraft autocannons, plus one 7.62mm machine gun. The armor thickness varies between 8 to 15 millimeters on the standard version, but there are some versions that are based directly on the T-54-55, and they have an armor thickness of upwards to 80 millimeters. The speed is 50 kilometers per hour or 31 miles per hour, and the vehicle has a crew of 6. Now, this vehicle here is the vehicle that the Afghan army is going to need when they start launching their counteroffensives against both the Taliban and other jihadi groups like the Islamic State and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Those are 2 other rival groups that are rivaled with the Taliban but are also fighting the Afghan army. Now, all of these guerrilla groups, they operate both in the countryside, but they also operate in cities and in the mountainous regions of Afghanistan. And this is a huge problem for the Afghan National Army to deal with. And the Afghan National Army has gotten to the point where they are hiring local militias to fight alongside them. And a vehicle like this would be useful as a counterinsurgency vehicle, and it would be useful in any future Afghan army offensives against the Taliban. The 57mm gun is fully automatic and has a rate of fire of between 120 and 250 rounds per minute. At close range, this would be a good vehicle for sweeping the countryside of enemy insurgents. The 57mm round can penetrate upwards to 90mm of armor, so the Taliban currently doesn't have any armored fighting vehicles that can withstand a hit from the 57mm shell. And all those light technicals and other light unarmored and armored fighting vehicles like technicals and captured American Humvees, they would be easily destroyed by this self-propelled anti-aircraft gun system turned infantry support vehicle. It would also be useful in repelling any enemy ambush or insurgent offensive. Whenever the Taliban attacks, they usually use ambush tactics. And you're not going to ambush a tank like this, especially when it has support from smaller vehicles like Humvees and other armored fighting vehicles being used by the Afghan army. In the Syrian civil war, and in the war in Iraq, this weapon system was used very effectively against both rebels and foreign jihadists like ISIS. It would also be useful in Afghanistan. And to make it even better, this weapon system would be useful for taking out enemy insurgents operating on top of the mountainous areas of Afghanistan, the mountain ranges and the hilly areas. The Afghan army has had a hard time targeting militants because they don't have enough artillery systems, but a mobile artillery system like this would be very useful in smoking out enemy insurgents hiding on the sides of or near mountain ranges or mountain valleys. Another area that the Afghan army, or in this case the Afghan Air Force, needs to improve on is the use of drones or attack drones, also known as unmanned combat aerial vehicles, or UCAVs for short. Now, when the Americans were there and when NATO was there, they had plenty of drone support from the US and other NATO members. But once the US pulls out, that drone support is going to be a bit limited. So the Afghans are going to have to purchase their own drone systems from other countries, and especially when it comes to unmanned attack drones. And so I found at least one inexpensive for a country like Afghanistan, one drone system or attack drone system that would be very useful for the Afghan Air Force, and that is the Shibold Camcopter S-100. The Shibold Camcopter S-100 is an Austrian-made helicopter-based unmanned combat aerial vehicle that was developed between 2003 and 2005. It is currently used by a variety of different countries like Germany, the UAE, China, and Austria itself. Now, this is a pretty advanced system. It is an unmanned helicopter that can be used as both a surveillance drone, but also an attack drone. And its main armament is two 76mm lightweight, multi-rolled, laser-guided anti-tank and anti-personnel missile launchers that are mounted on either side of the aircraft. It could also carry one 7.62mm machine gun and a miniature gun pod. And it has a speed of 222 kilometers per hour, or 137.9 miles per hour. It is actually one of the fastest UAVs on the market. The flight ceiling of this drone is 18,000 feet, or 5,400 meters. And it has an endurance of about 6 to 7 hours. Now, these vehicles are the cheapest of the advanced unmanned combat aerial vehicles that I could find on the market. The Afghan army could purchase about 10 of these for about $200,000 to $400,000 a piece. For about $4 million US, the Afghan army could have at least 10 or so of these vehicles already in service right now. These vehicles are purchased directly from Austria, which is a NATO member and a US ally. It would be easier to deliver if it's coming directly from a US ally, since the US is kind of still there right now. These UCAVs will be useful as surveillance drones and as anti-personnel and anti-armor drones. They can be used just like the American attack drones that are currently in service, except this here is a helicopter-based one, which would be much easier to maintain than the larger fixed-wing drones that are maintained and used by the US armed forces and the NATO countries that are operating in Afghanistan now. So the Afghan army could purchase some of these Shibold Camcopter S-100s right now, and they could arrive in the next few months, and they could be the standard issue drone of the Afghan Air Force. These drones would be useful as counterinsurgency vehicles, just like the Afghan army currently gets air support from US-made drones as of now in 2021, and have been since the war started way back in 2001. The Afghans are going to have as much drone protection or drone support from the US as they were beforehand, so they're going to have to invest in their own drones. And the Shibold Camcopter S-100 is a very cheap drone that is available right now on the market. And then the number one cheapest weapon system that the Afghan army needs right now is night vision. Yes, night vision. The Afghan special forces have night vision, but many of the Afghan army units don't have night vision as standard issued equipment, Now, the Taliban and many of the jihadi forces have been using night vision as standard issued equipment since about 2012. And recently, the Afghan Taliban, along with ISIS, have been using night vision in many of their assaults against the Afghan army units, especially in areas near the Afghan border, areas that are bordering Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Iran. The reason being is the Afghan Taliban and other jihadi forces are smuggling in these advanced weapon systems, or in the case of night vision, these standard issued weapon systems from neighboring countries, because night vision is part of the standard military equipment of most modern armies nowadays. Countries like Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Iran all have night vision as standard issued equipment with many of their armed forces. So it's not surprising that the Taliban is smuggling in this technology from neighboring countries, and they are using it very effectively against the Afghan army, especially near the border regions. Now, the Afghan army could purchase cheap night vision technology from the US and other countries. And one of the cheapest night vision systems out there is the American-made PVS-18, which is a night vision infrared helmet, high definition night vision digital helmet system that could be imported from the US at a very low price of just $27. For $27, the Afghan army could purchase 40,000 of these American PVS-18 series of night vision equipment for just $1.8 million. They could purchase 40,000 of these at $27 a piece for just $1.8 million. And that's pretty cheap. That would be enough to give at least almost every second or third soldier in the Afghan army night vision equipment. Now, when the Taliban uses night vision equipment, they use it pretty effectively, and it has gotten to the point where some Afghan army units have just surrendered out of fear of being overrun by Taliban units armed with night vision equipment. So if the Afghan army was to invest in night vision for both the regular army and even some of the pro-government militias, they would increase their fighting prowess on the battlefield in the current war in Afghanistan. And that's pretty much it. These are the cheapest weapon systems that I could find that would boost the fighting potential of the Afghan army in 2021 and prevent the Taliban from taking over Afghanistan again. Because it's gotten to the point now where the Afghan army in some areas are just relying on militias. There's no regular army in some areas of the country. So you might as well outfit both the army and these militias with some useful weapons. And these weapons were pretty useful in other conflicts like Syria and Iraq. They would be useful in the current war in Afghanistan. So what do you all think of these weapon systems? Please tell me in the comment section below. Which of these were your favorite? And until next time, this was J-Man Time signing off.